The sun blistered the New Mexico plains that day, turning the dust to chalk beneath Caleb Strickland's boots. He'd been fixing a fence post when he noticed it drops of crimson streaked along the dry earth, leading around the back of his barn. At first, he thought it might be a wounded coyote or some unlucky jackrabbit, but the blood was too thick, too human. His hand instinctively tightened around the rifle slung over his shoulder as he followed the trail. Rounding the corner, Caleb froze. There, collapsed beside his stone water well, was a young native man. His skin was ashen, his dark hair matted with sweat and dust. One hand clutched a deep wound in his side. The other reached weakly toward the wooden bucket that dangled just 3 feet above his head. His breath came in ragged gasps, and though pain clouded his gaze, his eyes stayed locked on Caleb, watchful like a deer that knows the hunter isn't finished yet. Caleb knew what the law said, what his neighbors would say too. This was Apache territory. Helping one of them could get you strung up just as fast as robbing a bank. And yet, something in the man's eyes stopped him cold. Not rage, not threat, just thirst. The kind of thirst Caleb had felt once during the drought of '43, when he wandered lost without a drop for 3 days. That memory came back with startling clarity. The cracking of his lips, the ache in his throat, the way he had dropped to his knees beside a muddy stream and drank like a man possessed. This man, this stranger, was drowning in the same kind of desperation. Caleb slowly slung the rifle off his shoulder and set it down. Then, without a word, he grabbed the bucket, filled it, and knelt beside the stranger. He lifted the rim to the man's lips, watching him drink like it was the only thing anchoring him to this world. "Easy now," Caleb muttered, though he didn't expect the man to understand. The native's hands trembled as he clutched the bucket, finishing one, then 2 more full scoops of water, before he could finally sit upright against the well wall. When he opened his mouth, only one word came out, cracked and raw. "Water." Caleb nodded. "You got it, friend." But even as he helped, a cold truth settled in Caleb's gut. Someone had tried to kill this man, and someone might be coming to finish the job. Caleb watched the color slowly return to the man's cheeks, but the relief was short-lived. When he leaned in to inspect the wound, his stomach turned. This wasn't a scrape from a fall or the gash of a wild animal. It was a bullet wound, clean entry powder burns still fresh around the edge. Close range. Recent. That changed everything. He glanced toward the horizon where the sun was beginning its slow descent behind the hills. If someone had shot this man, they could still be tracking him. And the blood trail. It led straight to Caleb's front yard. The Apache man must have sensed his fear. With effort, he lifted his hand pointed toward the western ridge, then dragged his thumb across his throat. Message received. Danger, soon. Caleb swore under his breath. He looked back toward his house, a small 2-room cabin with a rusted tin roof and not a single soul for 50 miles. He hadn't had visitors in weeks. No one to witness, no one to help. And that had always suited him fine. Until now. Moving fast, Caleb looped one arm under the man's shoulders. "Come on," he said through gritted teeth. "We've got to get you out of sight." The stranger tried to protest, his fingers weakly pressing against Caleb's chest, but there was no time to argue. Caleb half dragged, half carried him across the yard to the old root cellar behind the barn. It hadn't stored anything but shadows in years, but it would have to do. He pried open the heavy door, wincing at the rusty hinges, and lowered the wounded man inside, resting him against a stack of old potato crates. The Apache's eyes fluttered, but stayed open, sharp as ever. "You stay quiet," Caleb whispered. "I'll be back." No sooner had he stepped outside than he heard it. Hoofbeats, distant but fast. Caleb's pulse jumped. He grabbed a nearby bucket, ran back to the well, and began splashing water over the dirt trail leading to the barn, trying to smear the blood. It was useless, too much ground, too little time. The hoofbeats grew louder. Caleb turned and saw the dust cloud first rising behind a line of galloping horses. 6 riders' rifles slung across saddles, led by a man whose reputation stretched farther than any law he enforced, Sheriff Raymond Cutter, and Caleb already knew they weren't coming for coffee and conversation. Cutter pulled up 10 feet from the well, his boots hitting the ground with the grace of a man who had kicked in more doors than he'd knocked on. His pale gray eyes scanned the yard like a predator sizing up its prey. The other 5 riders fanned out behind him, forming a semicircle. Their hands rested casually on their weapons, but Caleb saw the tension beneath their silence. Evening Strickland Cutter said, voice smooth as oil and twice as slick. We're tracking a wounded Apache. Blood trail leads straight to your well. Caleb forced a steady breath and wiped sweat from his brow. Ain't seen any Apache, he said plainly. Been out fixin' fence all day. Cutter took a slow step forward, eyes narrowing at the darkened patches of dirt near the well. That so. He gestured toward the stains. You do your butcherin' right next to your drinking water now. Caleb shrugged. Had to put down a coyote 2 days ago. Could have bled out there. But Cutter wasn't convinced. He dismounted with deliberate calm, letting the silence stretch. The air felt tight, like the land itself was holding its breath. Cutter's boots crunched over gravel as he approached, his hand drifting closer to the revolver at his hip. You know the penalty for harboring an Indian fugitive? He asked quietly. Same as treason. Rope around the neck. No trial, no questions. Behind him, the other riders shifted. Some looked bored. A couple looked anxious. None looked surprised. Caleb didn't flinch. All I know is you're standing awful close to my well for someone without a warrant. Before Cutter could respond, a voice rang out. It wasn't English. It was Apache. Strong, rhythmic, melodic words that cut through the air like the notes of a flute carried by wind. The voice came from the well. Caleb's heart stopped. Cutter's face drained of color. He spun toward the stone wall, just as the wounded man Alon sat up, eyes burning, despite the blood still wet on his shirt. Cutter took a single step back. "Dear God," he whispered. "It's him." Confusion flashed across the faces of the deputies. Caleb blinked. Him. Then Alon spoke again, this time in perfect English. "Tell them, Sheriff. Tell them why you rode so hard to find me." Cutter looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Caleb didn't know who this man was yet, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just another fugitive. This was someone important. And suddenly, helping him wasn't just dangerous. It was historic. Cutter's jaw clenched so tightly, Caleb thought his teeth might snap. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at Elin like he was watching a nightmare materialize in broad daylight. Then the words came slow and reluctant. "This man," Cutter muttered, "is Elin Greyhawk, son of Chief Sonny Greyhawk of the Northern Apache, the one who brokered the Fort Trinity peace accord last spring." Caleb's eyes widened. He'd heard of that treaty. Everyone had. It was the only reason settlers had dared move back into the territory, because the Apache and the U.S. government had found common ground thanks to a brave negotiator willing to put down his weapon and speak for both sides. And now that man was bleeding in his root cellar. Cutter wasn't finished. Colonel Travis, the same man who signed that treaty, was found murdered 3 nights ago, shot in the back during a supposed meeting with the Apache. Witnesses said Elan was seen fleeing the scene. He's wanted for Travis's murder. Elan, still leaning heavily against the stone wall, shook his head. "That's what they want you to believe," he said, voice hoarse but rising. Colonel Travis wasn't killed by Apache hands. He was killed by men wearing Apache paint. Men who spoke just enough of our language to fool the guards. Cutter stiffened. You're accusing soldiers of staging the murder. No, Alan said. I'm accusing profiteers. Men who get rich off bullets and borders. Men who want this treaty to fail because war fills their pockets. The accusation landed like thunder. The deputies exchanged glances. One of them, young, sharp-faced, and visibly nervous, spoke up. Sir, if that's true, then why are we here? Why weren't we told any of this? Cutter barked, stand down, Deputy Hale. But the crack was showing. Elan's eyes didn't leave Cutter's face. There's a letter, he said. Colonel Travis wrote it the night before he died. He found out who was supplying weapons to renegade bands, names, amounts, dates. It's in my pouch. He reached with trembling fingers toward the leather satchel tied to his belt. Cutter's hand immediately went to his revolver. No, Elan said firm now. You're not destroying it. This letter is my proof, my protection. Cutter's face had gone from pale to ash gray. You're talking treason, he hissed. No, Elan answered. I'm talking truth. Caleb could see it now. The sheriff hadn't ridden out to bring justice. He'd ridden out to silence it. And the man he tried to silence just made the biggest accusation this side of the Rockies. The kind that doesn't go away quietly. The wind had picked up, rustling through the cottonwoods as if the land itself had gone uneasy. Caleb stood motionless, torn between fear and awe. Sheriff Cutter looked like a man unraveling his face, locked in a scowl, but his fingers twitching near his holster. Elan reached into his pouch with effort and pulled out a folded, blood-stained letter. This, he said, holding it in the air, is what they tried to kill me for. Colonel Travis named names. He warned that someone within the territorial marshal's office was accepting bribes. He wanted me to take this to the Apache Council. Cutter took a slow, threatening step forward. Give me that letter. So you can burn it? Elan shook his head. I don't think so, Marshal. But before Cutter could react, something unexpected happened. Deputy Hale dismounted and walked forward, his hands raised in peace. Marshal Cutter, he said carefully, 3 months ago. Remember that shipment of Spencer rifles that went missing? We were told Apache raiders stole them. Cutter's lips tightened. What's your point? I saw those same rifles 2 weeks later in the hands of settlers heading south. Same make, same serial lot. Hale looked around. That's been eating at me since. Now the other deputies shifted, 2 of them nodding slowly. One scratched his beard like he'd just remembered something that hadn't made sense until now. The silence grew thick. You're all fools, Cutter growled, hand tightening on his revolver. You think anyone will believe the word of a damn Indian and a handful of greenhorn deputies. Caleb took a step closer to Alan, suddenly aware that the line between law and lawlessness had never been thinner. That's when Elan began to sing. It wasn't English. It wasn't for the lawmen. It was a song that seemed pulled from the marrow of the earth, a low, resonant chant in the Apache tongue. The melody wasn't loud, but it had weight. Even the horses' grew still ears pricked toward the sound. Cutter sneered. What's he doing? Saying prayers. Caleb's spine stiffened. No, this wasn't a prayer. It was a signal. And as the final note faded, a sound rolled across the hills like thunder. Hoofbeats. Dozens of them. Coming fast. Cutter spun toward the ridge. His eyes went wide. So did Caleb's. An entire Apache war party was riding toward the ranch. Not 6, not 12, at least 50. And they weren't coming for blood. They were coming for the truth. The riders crested the ridge like a living wave, painted faces, braided hair weapons at their sides, but none drawn. They moved in perfect unison, horses pounding the earth in disciplined formation, dust rising behind them like storm clouds. At their head rode an older man, proud and tall despite his age. His silver-streaked hair was tied with eagle feathers, and his dark eyes scanned the yard with deliberate focus. He carried no weapon in hand, only authority, undeniable, commanding. Elan straightened as much as his wound would allow, his voice weak but steady. "That's my father," he said to Caleb, "Chief Sanny Greyhawk." Cutter's pistol trembled in his hand, now caught between defiance and dread. "This changes nothing," he snapped. "He's still a fugitive." Deputy Hale reached into his saddlebag and pulled out an envelope, holding it up. "This morning," he said loudly, "a message came from the territorial governor. All pursuit of Elan Greyhawk is to be suspended pending investigation into Colonel Travis's death." Cutter's face went red. "You lying?" "Check your dispatch pouch," Hale interrupted, "unless you've been too busy collecting bounties to read your own damn mail." The Apache riders had encircled the ranch not in aggression, but in presence, a silent line of witnesses. Chief Greyhawk dismounted and walked toward his son, his steps slow, deliberate. He knelt beside Elan, checked the wound, then looked up not at Cutter but at Caleb. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, not of names or tribes, but of men who had both risked something for a principle. Then the chief stood and turned toward Cutter. "My son tells me you came here to murder him," he said in flawless English. Cutter tried to recover his swagger. "I came to arrest him for murder." The chief didn't blink. "You came to erase a threat to protect the ones profiting from war. But the war ends today." He nodded to one of his warriors who stepped forward with a leather satchel. From it, he pulled documents, receipts, shipping logs, letters, all proof of Cutter's dealings with gun runners, his cut of every crooked shipment. Cutter's face collapsed. All the certainty he'd worn like armor melted under the weight of evidence. "I have orders," he shouted, voice cracking. "You had power," Chief Greyhawk said calmly, "and you used it to destroy peace. But power built on fear never lasts long, especially when the truth rides in with 50 witnesses." The ranch had gone silent except for the wind and the soft whinnies of the Apache horses. Sheriff Cutter stood alone, exposed pistol still trembling in his grip. The circle had closed around him, not with guns, but with truth. And truth, Caleb thought, could be heavier than any bullet. "I won't be threatened by savages," Cutter spat, though his voice had lost its venom. "No one's threatening you," Chief Greyhawk replied. "You've already destroyed yourself." But Cutter wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat, even when cornered. His eyes darted to the chief. "If I'm going down," he growled, "I'm taking you with me." In one swift motion, Cutter raised his pistol and took aim at the Apache chief's chest. But Elan moved first. Despite the pain, despite the blood still leaking from his side, he threw himself into the line of fire. The gun went off. The shot missed its mark because Caleb Strickland, rancher loner and accidental witness to history, had launched himself from the side and tackled Cutter mid-shot. The two men hit the dirt hard, Caleb's shoulder slamming into the sheriff's ribs. The pistol flew from Cutter's hand, landing near one of the deputies, who snatched it up. Caleb rolled off him, gasping. Cutter lay still, winded and beaten. Deputy Hale was already moving, binding the sheriff's hands with rope. Another deputy secured Hawkins, the only one who had stayed loyal to Cutter until the bitter end. The Apache warriors did not cheer. They did not draw weapons. They simply watched, eyes full of memory and judgment. Then Chief Greyhawk approached Caleb. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached out and placed both hands on Caleb's shoulders. His gaze was searching not for guilt or innocence, but for something deeper. Honor. Elan translated his voice thick with emotion. He says, "You are now brother to our people. What you did, showing mercy, risking your life standing for truth, those are the actions of a warrior." Caleb couldn't answer. Words wouldn't come. But something shifted in him then. A door opened. One he hadn't known was locked. And through that door came light. The ceremony that followed was like nothing Caleb had ever seen or even imagined. The Apache warriors dismounted as one form in a quiet circle around him. Each man stepped forward in turn, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder or arm. It wasn't a handshake. It wasn't a salute. It was something older, deeper, a gesture of kinship, of belonging. No one said a word until the last warrior stepped back into place. Then Chief Greyhawk approached once more this time, carrying something wrapped in a piece of hand-woven cloth. He unfolded it slowly and held out a war lance, its shaft smoothed by generations of use, decorated with eagle feathers, beads, and leather thongs worn soft from time. "This belonged to my grandfather," Ellen translated, "and his grandfather before him. No one outside our bloodline has ever carried it until now." The chief extended the lance to Caleb. "For courage," Elon said. "For honor. For the brotherhood you've shown." Caleb took the weapon in both hands, feeling its weight settle into his palms like an inheritance. Not a gift, not a trophy, something sacred, something earned. Behind him, the sky blushed with sunset streaks of red and gold rippling across the clouds, like the land was catching fire with peace, not war. Elon, now bandaged and supported by two younger braves, stood on his own feet again. "You'll recover," Caleb said quietly. Elan nodded. "Thanks to you, and thanks to the truth." The mood shifted as the Apache prepared to depart. Horses were saddled, supplies checked. The tribal healer gave Caleb a brief nod of respect before tending to Elan for the ride ahead. Then came the moment Caleb hadn't expected. Elan turned to him, clasping his forearm in the warrior's grip. "You saved more than my life today, brother," he said. "You saved a treaty. You saved a future." Caleb swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to get involved." "That's how most of history happens," Elan said, smiling faintly. "One good man, one cup of water." With that, the Apache mounted and rode. 50 riders fading into dusk, no banners, no trumpets, just the sound of hoofbeats and a promise that the world could change not with war, but with a single human choice. The next morning, the ranch felt impossibly quiet. The Apache were gone, leaving behind only hoof prints in the dust and a faint scent of smoke from their night fire. Caleb stood by the well, the same place where it had all begun, holding the war lance across his arms like it might vanish if he blinked. He wasn't the same man he'd been yesterday. Word spread faster than wildfire in the territory. By sundown, folks in neighboring towns were whispering about a rancher who stood between a lawman and a war party and walked away with both his life and a lance blessed by a chief. Some called it luck, others divine protection. But most knew better. It had been a choice, and it had changed everything. Sheriff Cutter and Hawkins were escorted in shackles to Fort Jasper, where a full military inquiry awaited. The documents from Elon's pouch, along with the testimony of multiple deputies, sparked a scandal that reached all the way to the territorial capital. The gun-running operation was dismantled piece by piece. Names were named, arrests were made, fortunes fell like dominoes. Colonel Travis's name was cleared, and Elon Greyhawk, once branded a murderer, was restored as a diplomat, his words now carrying the weight of justice instead of suspicion. The peace treaty, far from being destroyed, was expanded, not just renewed, but broadened to include Southern Apache bands previously left out of the negotiations. The council recognized Elon as the bridge between worlds, and Caleb Strickland's name was etched beside his in the council's winter records. For the first time in territorial history, a white settler was adopted into the Apache Nation not as a symbol or a formality, but as family. Caleb never sought praise. He didn't hang the war lance over his mantle or carve the date into a plaque. He simply went back to work, fixing fences, hauling water. But now, when he looked at the horizon, he didn't just see land. He saw people, and the fragile threads of peace they'd woven together, not with politics or guns, but with truth sacrifice, and a single act of mercy at a well. Weeks later, a letter arrived, hand-delivered by a rider wearing the insignia of the territorial governor's office. Caleb unfolded the parchment slowly, half expecting it to summon him to testify, or, worse, implicate him in the chaos that had unfolded. But instead, it was a commendation. Signed in bold ink and sealed with wax, the governor thanked him for exemplary courage, restraint, and moral judgment during a time of political deception and rising tensions. Caleb read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in the bottom drawer of his old writing desk. He didn't need a certificate to tell him what he already knew. The land had changed, and so had he. Later that month, 2 young Apache boys rode to his ranch carrying a message. Ilan wanted to meet again, this time not in pain, but in purpose. There were talks of establishing a permanent neutral council site between tribal and territorial leaders, and Ilan insisted that Caleb be present, not as a guard, not as a host, but as an equal. Caleb stood by the well that evening, watching the sky stretch orange across the valley. He ran a hand along the smooth shaft of the war lance, its feathers catching the wind. He thought of all that had nearly gone wrong, the bullet, the sheriff, the lie that almost burned the whole treaty down, and then he thought of what had gone right. A cup of water. That's how it started. That's how it always starts. Not with speeches, not with laws, but with one person choosing to see another as human, not enemy, needing help, deserving it. And Caleb understood now that he hadn't just given a dying man water that day. He'd given hope to a treaty, to a people, to a future. And in return, he'd been given something no lawman, no rancher, no war hero ever truly receives without earning it. He had been given family, and a place in a story bigger than himself. In a world where power often speaks louder than principle, true courage is choosing mercy when the world expects violence. Caleb didn't change the West with a gun, or with anger, or with authority. He changed it with water, simple human decency. So, if this story moved, you leave a comment. Tell us what you would have done if you were standing at that well. Would you have lowered your weapon or the bucket? And if stories like this matter to you about unlikely heroes' real choices and the kind of history that never makes the textbooks, then hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the smallest acts rewrite the biggest chapters. And sometimes peace rides in on horseback.